The rain had been falling since before sunrise, thin at first, then heavier, turning the narrow dirt road into a ribbon of mud. People hurried past with umbrellas, shoulders hunched, eyes down, each wrapped in their own quiet urgency. No one noticed the boy sitting beneath the broken bus stop shelter at the edge of town. He couldn't have been more than 13. His clothes clung to his thin frame, damp and faded, a shirt that once might have been white and pants patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. A small backpack rested at his feet, its zipper crooked, its straps fraying. Inside were only a few things: a worn notebook, a pencil, a folded photograph, and a tiny, dog-eared Bible with loose pages. The boy's name was Elias. He had been sitting there since the night before. Not because he was waiting for a bus. Not because he was lost. But because he had nowhere else to go. 2 days earlier, Elias had still had a home. Not a perfect one. Not a warm, loving one. But it had been a roof, 4 walls, and people he called family. Until they told him to leave. It started quietly, the way many storms do. Elias lived with distant relatives after his parents passed away when he was very young. He never really spoke about how they died. Not because it was a secret, but because the memories hurt too much, and because talking about them never changed anything. His relatives tolerated him. They fed him. They let him sleep in a corner of a small room on a thin mat. But they never truly accepted him. Elias was different. While other kids in the neighborhood spent afternoons playing basketball or scrolling through phones, Elias often sat alone, reading his small Bible or scribbling lyrics into his notebook. He talked to God in whispers. Sometimes in full sentences, sometimes in songs. His relatives didn't understand this. At first, they mocked him. "Why do you waste time praying?" One uncle would sneer. "Prayer doesn't put food on the table," another would say. Elias never argued. He would simply lower his eyes and say softly, "It gives me peace." The mocking turned into irritation. The irritation turned into anger. One evening, after Elias was caught singing quietly in the corner instead of doing chores fast enough, everything exploded. His aunt grabbed his notebook and flipped through it. "What is this nonsense?" she snapped. "They're songs," Elias said. "For church?" she asked sharply. "For God," Elias answered. Her face hardened. "You are obsessed," she said. "Always praying, always singing. You think you're special." Elias shook his head. I feel close to him when I sing." That sentence sealed his fate. His uncle stood up from his chair. "We are tired of this," he said. "You bring nothing useful to this house. No money, no future, only prayers and dreams." Elias felt his chest tighten. "I can work," he said quickly. "I can do more chores. I can." "We don't want you here anymore," his aunt cut in. Silence filled the room. Elias thought he had misheard. "I'll stop singing," he whispered. "I'll stop praying out loud." His uncle shook his head. Too late. They threw his small backpack onto the floor. "Take your things and go." Elias stood frozen. "Where?" he asked. "That is not our problem." He wanted to cry. He wanted to scream. But something inside him went quiet instead. He slowly gathered his notebook, his Bible, and the folded photograph of his parents. He slipped them into his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, he turned back. "I will pray for you," he said softly. His aunt laughed bitterly. "Pray somewhere else." The door closed behind him. Just like that, Elias became invisible. The first night, he slept behind a closed market stall, curled up on cardboard. The ground was cold. The air smelled of damp wood and garbage. Rats scurried nearby. He clutched his backpack to his chest and whispered a prayer he had learned as a small child. "God, please don't leave me." Tears soaked into the cardboard. But he slept. The next day, Elias wandered. He had no money. He had no phone. He had no plan. By afternoon, hunger twisted his stomach into painful knots. He passed food stalls and tried not to look. The smell of fried fish made his mouth water so badly it hurt. At one stall, an old woman noticed him staring. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Elias hesitated. He had learned that sometimes admitting need led to kindness. Other times, it led to shouting. "Yes," he said quietly. The woman studied his thin arms, his dirty clothes, his tired eyes. Without another word, She handed him a small bag of rice and fish. "Eat," she said. Elias took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. He stepped aside and ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a feast. That night, he found the broken bus stop shelter. It wasn't much, but it had a roof. He sat there, hugging his knees, listening to the rain, and pulled out his notebook. Most of the pages were filled with lyrics. Not polished, not perfect, but honest. Songs about loneliness, songs about hope, songs about a God who listens when no one else does. Elias didn't know how to read music. He didn't know technical terms. He just sang what he felt. Softly at first, then a little louder. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was pure, clear, carrying something heavy and beautiful at the same time. A security guard from a nearby building heard him. He stopped walking. He listened. The boy didn't notice. He sang about being small in a big world. About being afraid. About trusting God anyway. The guard felt a strange tightness in his chest. When Elias finished, the guard cleared his throat. Elias jumped, startled. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'll go." The guard raised a hand. "No," he said. "You sing very well." Elias blinked. "I do." The guard nodded. "Why are you out here?" Elias hesitated. "My family told me to leave." "Why?" Elias looked down. "Because I pray and sing about God." The guard shook his head slowly. "People can be very cruel," he said. He reached into his pocket and handed Elias a small bill. "Buy food, and come back here if you need shelter at night. I can't promise safety, but I can keep an eye out." Elias's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Over the next few weeks, Elias survived like this. Odd kindnesses, leftover food, a corner to sleep in, and singing. He sang on sidewalks, near markets, outside small churches. Sometimes people ignored him. Sometimes they told him to be quiet. Sometimes they dropped a coin. But Elias kept singing, not because it made money, not because he thought he would become famous, but because when he sang, he felt less alone. One afternoon, a woman named Marisol stopped to listen. She was a local music teacher who ran a small community choir. She had been having a terrible day. Low funding, broken instruments, students dropping out. She almost walked past, but the boy's voice stopped her. It wasn't perfect. It cracked in places, but it carried emotion that couldn't be taught. She stood there, stunned. When he finished, she approached him. "What is your name?" she asked. "Elias." "Where did you learn to sing?" Elias shrugged. "I just always have." "Do you have training?" "No, ma'am." Marisol swallowed. "Would you like to sing with my choir?" Elias's heart pounded. "A choir?" "Yes. We meet at the community center. I can't pay you, but you'll have a safe place to practice." Elias nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you." Marisol didn't know it yet, but that small invitation would change everything. At the choir, Elias met other kids who came from difficult backgrounds. Some were poor, some had lost parents, some were struggling in school. But when they sang together, they were equal. Elias soaked up everything. He watched how others breathed, how they shaped words. He practiced constantly. Marisol noticed something special. Elias didn't just sing notes. He told stories through his voice. One evening after practice, Marisol asked him where he lived. Elias hesitated. "At the bus stop." Her face fell. She arranged for him to stay in a tiny storage room at the community center. It wasn't much, but it was dry. It had a mattress, a lock. Elias cried quietly that night, overwhelmed by gratitude. Months passed. Elias grew a little stronger, a little more confident, but his heart still carried deep scars. He still prayed every night. Not for fame, not for riches, just for a place to belong. One day, Marisol came into rehearsal buzzing with energy. "There are auditions for America's Got Talent," she said. "They're accepting online submissions." The kids murmured. "People from all over the world apply," she continued. "It's a huge opportunity." Elias listened silently. Marisol looked at him. "You should audition." Elias's stomach dropped. "Me? Yes." He shook his head quickly. "I'm not good enough." Marisol knelt in front of him. "Elias, you have something rare. Not just a voice, a story, a heart." "I don't speak English well," he said. That can be worked on. I've never been on a stage. You sing on sidewalks. That's different. Marisol smiled gently. Let me worry about the rest. Just sing. They recorded a simple video in an empty classroom. Elias stood in front of a cracked whiteboard. No lights, no microphone, just his voice. He sang a song he had written himself. About being abandoned, about praying alone, about believing God still listens. When he finished, the room was silent. Marisol wiped her eyes. They submitted the video. Then they waited. Weeks passed. Elias tried not to think about it. Life continued. Practice, helping clean the center, singing at small church gatherings. Then one afternoon, Marisol burst into the room, breathless. They called, she said. Elias looked up. You're invited to audition in front of the judges. The world seemed to tilt. America, Elias whispered. Marisol nodded. Elias felt dizzy. I can't, he said. I don't have money, a passport, anything. Marisol had already started making calls. A local charity stepped in. The community raised small donations. Someone helped with paperwork. Someone donated clothes. Piece by piece, the impossible became possible. The night before he left, Elias sat alone with his notebook. He wrote a new song. Not polished, not perfect, but honest. A song about a boy who was told his faith made him worthless. A boy who kept believing anyway. He didn't know if he would sing it, but it felt important to write. The flight was Elias's first time on an airplane. He stared out the window in awe. Clouds looked like mountains of cotton. He thought about the bus stop, the rain, the nights he had begged God not to leave him. He whispered, "Thank you." At the AGT audition venue, everything felt overwhelming. Bright lights, huge cameras, crowds of hopeful performers. Elias clutched his backpack. Marisol squeezed his shoulder. "Just sing," she said. When his name was called, his legs felt like jelly. He walked onto the stage. 4 judges sat behind a long table. Thousands of empty seats loomed behind them. Simon Cowell leaned forward. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elias," he said softly. "Where are you from?" "The Philippines." "And how old are you?" 13. Simon nodded. "Why did you decide to audition?" Elias swallowed. "I sing because it helps me talk to God. And because my family told me to leave because of my faith. But I still believe." The room went very quiet. Another judge asked gently, "Where do you live now?" Elias hesitated. "At a community center. A teacher helped me." Simon's face softened. "What will you be singing today?" "A song I wrote." "Whenever you're ready." The music began. A simple piano track. Elias closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't on a giant stage. He was at the bus stop. In the rain, alone. He sang about kneeling on cold ground. About praying when no one listens. About being told you're nothing. About holding on to faith anyway. His voice trembled, then steadied, then soared, not in a showy way, but in a way that carried raw emotion. Halfway through, one judge wiped away tears. Audience members leaned forward. Some covered their mouths. Elias sang the final line. "I was abandoned for my faith, but I'm not abandoned by you." Silence. A thick, heavy silence. Then the audience erupted. A standing ovation. One judge had tears streaming down her face. Another shook his head in disbelief. Simon didn't speak right away. He simply stared at Elias. Finally, he said, "Elias, I have heard thousands of singers. Many have perfect voices. Very few have a voice that feels like truth." Elias's hands shook. "You went through something no child should go through," Simon continued. "And instead of becoming bitter, you turned it into something beautiful." Another judge said, "Your faith didn't make you weak. It made you strong." Elias felt tears sliding down his cheeks. Simon smiled. "I think the people who abandoned you made the biggest mistake of their lives." He reached for the golden buzzer. The moment it was pressed, golden confetti exploded from above. Elias gasped. He dropped to his knees, sobbing. The audience roared. Marisol cried backstage. For the first time in his life, Elias felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a problem, but as a gift. In the days that followed, Elias's audition went viral. Millions watched. People from around the world shared his story. Messages poured in. Churches offered support. Families offered to adopt. Musicians offered mentorship. Elias was overwhelmed. But he stayed the same. He still carried his small Bible. He still prayed quietly before singing. When asked what he wanted most, he said, "I want other kids who feel alone to know God hasn't forgotten them." Elias didn't win the entire competition. But he didn't need to. He left with a recording opportunity, scholarships, and something far more valuable: a future. One day, after a rehearsal, Elias sat alone and opened his notebook. He read the first song he had ever written, the one about being abandoned. He added a new verse: "I was left in the dark, but I found a light. Not because the world was kind, but because God was faithful." Elias closed the notebook and smiled. He had been abandoned for his faith. But his faith had carried him to a place he never imagined. And his song had done what no argument ever could. It had turned pain into hope, silence into applause, a forgotten boy into a voice the world would never forget.